A ripple in the still waters. The summer sun stretched its rays across the quiet suburb of Willow Grove, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson. It was the kind of day that beckoned people to emerge from their air-conditioned homes and soak up the warmth, a day that echoed with laughter and the gentle hum of community life. The local park, a central gathering place in the small, predominantly white neighborhood, was buzzing with activity. Parents mingled with one another, while children dashed through the playground or splashed in the shallow waters of the public pool. Among them sat Ava Bennett, a 35-year-old black woman whose presence in Willow Grove always seemed to stir curiosity, if not outright stares. Ava wasn't a stranger to the neighborhood, having lived here for nearly 4 years, but she was a stranger in the eyes of many of its residents. Even after all this time, her efforts to integrate herself into the community were often met with polite indifference or thinly veiled discomfort. Ava, a third-grade teacher at the local elementary school, was no stranger to being the only black face in the room. She had learned to navigate the uneasy waters of subtle racism and social exclusion with grace and patience. But that didn't make it any easier. Sitting at the edge of the community pool, she watched the children play, her feet barely skimming the water's surface. Her niece, Jasmine, a bright and energetic 7-year-old, was splashing with a group of friends, her laughter ringing out like music against the summer air. Jasmine was the reason Ava had come to Willow Grove in the first place. After her sister's passing, she had taken custody of the little girl, determined to give her the best life possible. The move from the inner city to this quiet, affluent suburb was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance for both of them to heal and build a new life. But Willow Grove had its own barriers, ones that Ava had not anticipated. She glanced around the pool, noting the familiar stares. Some of the parents nodded politely in her direction, their smiles tight and perfunctory. Others pretended not to notice her, as if the very act of acknowledging her presence was uncomfortable. Ava sighed softly, turning her attention back to Jasmine. The little girl had made friends more easily than Ava had, her innocence shielding her from the complexities of race and social class. For now, Ava knew that Jasmine's skin color would eventually become a defining factor in her experiences, but she hoped to delay that reality for as long as possible. As Ava settled back into her lounge chair, a familiar figure approached. It was Lisa Harper, one of the PTA mothers whose son, Max, was in Ava's class. Lisa was tall and blonde, with the kind of effortless beauty and confidence that seemed to come naturally to the women in Willow Grove. She smiled warmly, though Ava could sense the underlying tension in the gesture. "Ava, how are you?" Lisa asked, her voice carrying the kind of forced friendliness that Ava had grown accustomed to. "I'm good, Lisa. Just enjoying the weather," Ava replied with a polite smile. "That's great. Max has been raving about your class. He really loves the way you make the lessons fun," Lisa said, settling into the lounge chair next to Ava. Ava's smile softened. If there was one thing that gave her solace in this town, it was her students. In the classroom, she was simply Miss Bennett, the teacher who cared deeply about her kids and made learning an adventure. Skin color didn't matter in that space, and for a few hours each day, Ava felt like she truly belonged. "I'm glad to hear that," Ava replied. "Max is such a bright kid. He's got a real knack for problem solving." Lisa nodded, but her gaze drifted toward the pool, where Jasmine was now climbing out, dripping wet and laughing as she ran toward Ava. The shift in Lisa's posture was almost imperceptible, but Ava caught it. The subtle tightening of her jaw, the way her smile faltered for just a moment. "Jasmine, slow down," Ava called out with a chuckle as her niece bounded over, leaving a trail of water behind her. "Auntie Ava, can we get ice cream?" "Please," Jasmine asked, her big brown eyes wide with anticipation. Ava looked at the clock on her phone. "Sure, sweetheart. Just give me a second." As she rose from her chair, she caught the flicker of something in Lisa's expression. Was it discomfort? Disapproval? It was hard to tell, but Ava had seen that look enough times to recognize its shadow. She ignored it, reaching for her wallet and leading Jasmine toward the concession stand. As they waited in line, Ava could feel the weight of the eyes on her again. The whispers were soft but unmistakable, a low hum that seemed to follow her wherever she went. She had learned to tune it out most of the time, but today it gnawed at her, the quiet judgment hanging in the air like a fog she couldn't shake. "Chocolate or vanilla?" Ava asked, trying to focus on Jasmine's joy instead of the murmurs around her. "Chocolate, definitely chocolate," Jasmine replied, bouncing on her toes. Ava smiled, placing the order and handing the ice cream cone to her niece. As they found a spot under the shade of a large oak tree, Ava let out a deep breath. She wished she could be as carefree as Jasmine, as oblivious to the silent barriers that seemed to surround them. But her peace was short-lived. A sudden commotion near the pool drew her attention. She heard the splash first, louder than the others, followed by a sharp, high-pitched scream. Instinctively, Ava's eyes darted toward the source of the noise, and her heart dropped. A child was in the water, thrashing wildly. Her small body was barely visible beneath the surface, but the blonde pigtails plastered to her head were unmistakable. Ava recognized the child. Emily Harper, Lisa's daughter. She was in the deep end, her tiny arms flailing helplessly as she struggled to stay afloat. Ava's pulse quickened. Without thinking, she leaped to her feet, sprinting toward the pool. The world around her seemed to blur as adrenaline took over, her mind focused solely on the little girl in the water. "Emily," Ava shouted, but the child was already sinking. She didn't hesitate. Ava dove into the pool, her powerful strokes cutting through the water with precision and urgency. Within seconds, she reached Emily, wrapping her arms around the girl's small, limp body and pulling her to the surface. "Hold on, baby, I've got you," Ava murmured, her voice steady despite the panic bubbling inside her. She swam toward the edge of the pool, cradling Emily's head above the water as best she could. When she reached the side, strong hands reached down to help pull them both out. Ava carefully laid Emily on the ground, her heart pounding as she assessed the situation. The little girl wasn't breathing. "Someone call 911," Ava shouted, her voice cutting through the stunned silence of the crowd that had gathered. Without a moment's hesitation, Ava began CPR. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she pressed down on Emily's chest, counting under her breath. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly as Ava worked, her focus unwavering. "Come on, Emily," she whispered. "Breathe, baby. Just breathe." After what felt like an eternity, a small, sputtering cough escaped Emily's lips. Water poured from her mouth as her chest heaved with a desperate gasp for air. The crowd erupted into a collective sigh of relief, but Ava barely registered it. Her entire world narrowed to the tiny, fragile life she had just saved. Emily's eyes fluttered open, filled with confusion and fear, but she was breathing. She was alive. Ava gently stroked the girl's hair, whispering soothing words as the paramedics arrived. The world around her began to come back into focus, and for the first time, Ava became aware of the crowd that had gathered. Parents, children, lifeguards. Everyone was staring at her, and not all the faces were kind. Some looked at her with awe and admiration, but others wore expressions of shock, disbelief, and even discomfort. Ava's stomach churned as she caught snippets of whispered conversations. "Who is she? Where did she come from? Can you believe it?" The gratitude she had expected to feel after saving a child's life was overshadowed by something darker, something that had always lingered in the corners of her life in Willow Grove. Even in this moment of heroism, Ava couldn't escape the uncomfortable truth. To some of these people, she was still just an outsider. As the paramedics loaded Emily into the ambulance and her parents rushed to follow, Ava stood alone, her clothes soaked and her heart heavy. She had saved a life, but in that moment, she wondered if she had lost something too. She looked at the crowd one last time, their stares still following her. Then, without a word, Ava turned and walked back to where Jasmine sat, oblivious to the storm that had just passed. The ripples of that day were only beginning. Whispers in the wind. The ride home from the pool was quiet. Jasmine, normally a chatterbox, was subdued, sensing the tension that radiated from her aunt. Ava gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles turning white against the smooth leather. Her mind was still racing, replaying the events of the day in slow motion. The feel of Emily's small body in her arms, the panic that had gripped her when the child wasn't breathing, the relief when she finally coughed up the water. Each moment was seared into her memory. But what haunted Ava most weren't the events of the rescue itself. It was what had happened afterward. The looks, the whispers, the feeling of being an outsider, even in the wake of a heroic act. They didn't even ask for my name, Ava thought bitterly as she pulled into her driveway. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn. She turned off the engine and glanced at Jasmine, who was still licking the remnants of her ice cream cone, her face scrunched in quiet contemplation. "Auntie Ava." Jasmine finally broke the silence, her voice small and uncertain. "Yes, sweetie." "Why were those people looking at you like that?" The question hit Ava like a punch to the gut. She had hoped that Jasmine hadn't noticed, that she could shield her niece from the ugliness of the world for just a little longer. But of course, Jasmine had seen it. How could she not? Ava had seen those looks her entire life, stares filled with suspicion, discomfort, or worse, outright disdain. And now, Jasmine was old enough to start noticing too. Ava sighed, leaning her head back against the seat. How could she explain to a 7-year-old the complexities of race, of prejudice, of the ways in which the world would sometimes view them as other, no matter how much good they did? "They were just surprised, I think," Ava said carefully, choosing her words with caution. "Sometimes people don't know how to act when something unexpected happens." "But you saved that girl. Shouldn't they have been happy?" Jasmine asked, her brows furrowed in confusion. "You were a hero." Ava smiled softly at her niece's innocence. In Jasmine's world, heroes were celebrated, no matter who they were. But Ava knew that the real world wasn't always that simple. "I'm just glad Emily is okay," Ava said, dodging the question. "That's what's important." Jasmine nodded, though Ava could tell she wasn't fully satisfied with the answer. She reached out and ruffled her niece's curls, trying to push away the heaviness that had settled over her heart. "Come on, let's get you cleaned up before dinner." Inside their modest, cozy home, Ava and Jasmine fell into their usual evening routine. Jasmine headed straight for the living room, flipping through the channels on the TV, while Ava prepared a simple dinner. The comforting rhythm of chopping vegetables and stirring pots helped to calm her nerves, but the events of the day still weighed heavily on her. As she sought at the onions, the doorbell rang, startling her. She wiped her hands on a towel and headed to the door, unsure of who would be visiting at this hour. When she opened it, she was greeted by an unexpected sight. Lisa Harper, Emily's mother, standing on her porch. Lisa looked frazzled, her blonde hair pulled into a messy ponytail and her face pale and drawn. She clutched her purse tightly, as if it were a lifeline, and her eyes darted nervously to the side, avoiding Ava's gaze. "Lisa," Ava asked, surprised, "is everything okay?" Lisa shifted uncomfortably, glancing over her shoulder as if she were afraid someone might see her. I just wanted to stop by and say thank you for what you did today, for saving Emily." Her voice was strained, the words tumbling out in a rush. Ava could sense the tension in her, the unease that still lingered from earlier. It was as if Lisa was forcing herself to be here, to make this gesture, but there was something holding her back, something unspoken. "You don't have to thank me," Ava said, stepping aside to invite Lisa in. "I'm just glad I was there to help." Lisa hesitated for a moment before stepping over the threshold. Ava led her into the living room, where Jasmine was sprawled on the floor, coloring in a book. Jasmine looked up when she saw Lisa, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Hi," Jasmine said brightly. "You're Emily's mom, right? I'm glad she's okay." Lisa smiled weakly at Jasmine. "Yes, thank you. She's fine, thanks to your aunt." There was a brief, awkward silence as Lisa glanced around the room, taking in the modest furnishings and the framed photos on the walls. Ava could tell that Lisa was uncomfortable, and she had a sinking feeling that this wasn't just about thanking her for saving Emily. There was something else going on. "Can I get you some tea or coffee?" Ava offered, trying to ease the tension. Lisa shook her head. "No, I won't stay long. I just wanted to explain." Ava frowned, confused. "Explain what?" Lisa took a deep breath, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Earlier, at the pool, after everything happened, I didn't react the way I should have. I didn't thank you properly. I didn't even ask for your name. And I'm sorry for that." Ava's heart sank as she realized where this was going. She had seen it before. The guilt, the awkwardness that followed when someone realized they had treated her differently because of her race. Lisa was trying to make amends, but the discomfort in her voice told Ava that this wasn't just about gratitude. It was about the unspoken barrier that had stood between them. "You were in shock," Ava said gently, trying to let Lisa off the hook. "It's understandable. Your daughter almost drowned." But Lisa shook her head. "No, that's not it. I mean, yes, I was in shock, but that's not why I acted the way I did." She looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's because you're. She couldn't bring herself to say it, but Ava knew exactly what she meant. "Because I'm black," Ava finished for her tone calm but firm. Lisa flinched, her face flushing with embarrassment. "I didn't mean it like that. It's just, I wasn't expecting it. I mean, you're not someone I know. And in a place like Willow Grove, it's just different." Ava felt a sharp pang in her chest. She had heard variations of this excuse many times before. People like Lisa didn't see themselves as racist. They didn't even think of their actions as prejudiced. But their discomfort, their hesitation, their inability to fully embrace someone like Ava as part of their community spoke volumes. "Different," Ava repeated softly, her voice carrying the weight of years of quiet exclusion. Lisa looked up at her, eyes wide with guilt. "I didn't mean it like that. I'm so sorry, Ava. I really am. You saved my daughter's life, and I acted like a terrible person." Ava didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to let Lisa off the hook, to tell her that it was okay, that she understood. But another part of her was tired of making excuses for people who should know better, tired of pretending that their discomfort wasn't a reflection of something deeper. "I'm not looking for an apology, Lisa," Ava said quietly. "I did what anyone would have done. I don't need gratitude. I just want to be seen as a person like everyone else, not as an outsider." Lisa's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded quickly. "You're right. You're absolutely right. I've been so blind. I've lived in this bubble, and I didn't realize how much I was contributing to the problem." Ava felt a flicker of sympathy for the woman in front of her. Lisa was clearly grappling with her own biases, her own discomfort, and she was trying, really trying, to make things right. But Ava wasn't sure if a single conversation could bridge the gap that had been built over years of silent prejudice. "I appreciate you coming here," Ava said after a long pause. "But this isn't just about you and me. It's about how people like me are seen in places like this. It's about the way we're treated, even when we do something good. That's not something you can fix with an apology." Lisa nodded, wiping away a tear. I know I can't change everything. But I can start with myself. And I promise, Ava, I will do better." Ava looked at her for a moment, searching for sincerity in her words. She could see that Lisa was genuine, that she wanted to be a better person. But Ava also knew that change didn't come easily, not for Lisa, and not for Willow Grove. "I hope so," Ava said softly, her voice filled with both hope and weariness. Lisa stood up, smoothing her skirt nervously. "Thank you again. For everything." Ava nodded, and with that, Lisa left, closing the door behind her. Ava stood in the quiet house, her mind spinning with the weight of their conversation. As she turned back toward the kitchen, Jasmine's voice, the weight of change. Ava stood in the quiet of her home, staring at the closed door. The weight of the conversation with Lisa Harper hung heavy in the air, a palpable presence that wouldn't leave her thoughts. The familiar comfort of her living room, with its worn, cozy furniture and soft lighting, suddenly felt confining, like the walls were pressing in on her. She had spent years trying to build a life in Willow Grove, blending into a community where she often felt invisible. But today, the truth had cracked through the surface. No matter how much she gave, no matter how hard she tried to be part of the fabric of this neighborhood, there were limits. Invisible walls that kept people like her, people who didn't quite fit the mold, on the outskirts, forever seen as different, as outsiders. Ava's hands trembled slightly as she returned to the kitchen, where the simmering pot on the stove released the aroma of spices and onions. She absently stirred the contents, her mind far away. She wasn't looking for pity, but the interaction with Lisa had opened a wound Ava had tried so hard to bandage. She had grown used to the quiet distance, the polite smiles that never quite reached the eyes of her neighbors, the surface-level interactions that rarely ventured beyond small talk. But today, the truth was laid bare. It wasn't just about what had happened at the pool. It was about everything that led up to that moment. It was about a lifetime of feeling like she didn't belong. Jasmine's voice, full of curiosity, broke through Ava's thoughts. "Auntie Ava, why was that lady crying?" Ava turned to find her niece standing in the doorway, her eyes wide and inquisitive. Jasmine had always been perceptive, wise beyond her years, in ways that sometimes took Ava by surprise. She could sense the tension, the emotions swirling beneath the surface, even if she didn't fully understand them. Ava crouched down to Jasmine's level, brushing a strand of hair from her niece's forehead. "She was just upset, sweetie," Ava said softly, trying to shield Jasmine from the complexities of the situation. Sometimes people realize they've made a mistake, and it makes them feel bad. Jasmine frowned, her small brow furrowed. Did she do something wrong? Ava hesitated, unsure how much to explain. She didn't want Jasmine to carry the same burdens she had grown up with, the same awareness of how the world could treat people like them. But at the same time, she didn't want to lie. Jasmine was old enough to start noticing things, and Ava knew she couldn't protect her from the truth forever. "She didn't do anything wrong today, exactly," Ava began carefully. "But sometimes people don't see each other for who they really are. They see the outside, what someone looks like, or where they come from, and they make judgments based on that. It's not fair, but it happens." Jasmine tilted her head, considering Ava's words. "So she was sad because she judged you?" Ava smiled faintly, impressed by how quickly Jasmine had grasped the situation. "Yes, something like that." Jasmine's face scrunched up in confusion. "But why?" "You saved her daughter. You're the nicest person I know." Ava's heart swelled with love for her niece, but the sadness in her chest lingered. If only the world were as simple and pure as Jasmine's mind made it out to be. "It's complicated, Jazzy," Ava said, using her niece's nickname in an attempt to soften the conversation. "People don't always mean to act that way. Sometimes they don't even realize they're doing it." Jasmine's eyes narrowed thoughtfully, and she crossed her arms, mimicking the serious expressions she'd seen on TV detectives. "Well, that's dumb. People should just be nice to each other." Ava chuckled softly, pulling Jasmine into a hug. "I agree, sweetie. I agree." As Jasmine nestled into Ava's embrace, the warmth of the moment provided a brief respite from the heaviness that had settled over her. But as much as Ava wanted to protect Jasmine from the realities of the world, she knew that Jasmine would soon face them herself. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. The thought made Ava's heart ache. Later that evening, after dinner, Ava tucked Jasmine into bed, reading her favorite story before turning off the light. She watched as Jasmine drifted off to sleep, her small chest rising and falling in the peaceful rhythm of a child's dreams. Ava lingered at the door, her hand resting on the frame as she watched her niece's serene face. How long could she keep Jasmine's world so innocent? How long until Jasmine, too, would feel the sting of being judged by her skin color? After Jasmine was asleep, Ava retreated to the small patio in the backyard, seeking the quiet solace of the night. The air was cool and still, the sky above a blanket of stars. She sat down in one of the weathered chairs and closed her eyes, trying to let the peace of the moment wash over her. But her mind wouldn't rest. She had been in Willow Grove for nearly 6 years now, having moved here for a teaching job that had seemed like a dream come true. She had loved her work from the beginning, and over time she had built a life here. But despite her best efforts, she had never quite felt like she belonged. Willow Grove was a place of manicured lawns and white picket fences, a town that prided itself on its charm and tight-knit community. But it was also a town where being different, whether by race, background, or economic status, made you stand out in ways that weren't always welcome. She had tried to integrate herself into the fabric of the community. She joined the PTA, volunteered at school events, attended neighborhood barbecues. But no matter how hard she tried, she always felt like she was standing just outside the circle, looking in. The parents were friendly enough, but there was a distance, an unspoken barrier that kept Ava from ever feeling fully accepted. And then, today, after saving a little girl's life, she had been reminded of just how deep those barriers ran. The hesitation in Lisa's voice, the awkwardness, the reluctance to acknowledge her as more than just a black woman who happened to be there. It was like all the effort Ava had put into being part of this community had been undone in a single moment. As she sat there under the stars, the weight of it all pressed down on her. She was tired. Tired of having to prove herself. Tired of feeling like she had to be twice as good just to be seen as equal. Tired of the whispers, the stares, the polite but distant interactions that reminded her she didn't truly belong here. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her, interrupting her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw a text message from her friend and fellow teacher, Monica. Monica, hey girl, heard about what happened today at the pool. Are you okay? Ava stared at the message for a moment, feeling a rush of gratitude for Monica's concern. Monica had been one of the few people in Willow Grove who had welcomed Ava with open arms from the start. She was a fellow teacher, and though she was white, she had a deep understanding of the challenges Ava faced as a black woman in a predominantly white town. They had bonded quickly over their shared frustrations with the school system, their love of teaching, and their late-night chats over wine. Ava typed out a quick response. Ava, I'm okay. Just processing everything. A few seconds later, her phone buzzed again. Monica, I can't imagine how you're feeling. Do you want to talk about it? I can come over. Ava hesitated. Part of her wanted to be alone, to sit with her thoughts in the quiet of the night. But another part of her, the part that had been carrying this weight for so long, longed for the comfort of a friend. Ava, sure, I'd like that. Come on over. Monica lived just a few blocks away, and within 15 minutes, Ava heard the sound of her friend's footsteps approaching the back patio. Monica appeared, carrying a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, her face lit up with concern. I figured you could use this, Monica said, holding up the wine with a small smile. Ava chuckled softly. You know me well. They sat together in the cool night air, sipping their wine in silence for a few moments before Monica spoke. I heard about what happened at the pool, Monica said softly. I can't believe people are still like that. Ava sighed, swirling the wine in her glass. It's Willow Grove. People don't even realize they're doing it half the time. Monica nodded. But that doesn't make it right. No, it doesn't, Ava agreed. It just makes it exhausting. Monica reached over and squeezed Ava's hand. You shouldn't have to deal with this. Ava, you're a damn hero. You saved that little girl's life. Ava smiled, but it was a sad, weary smile. I didn't do it to be a hero. I just reacted. Anyone would have done the same. Not anyone, Monica said pointedly. Not everyone would have had the presence of mind, the courage. You did something extraordinary, and I'm proud of you. Ava's heart swelled with gratitude for her friend's words. Monica had always been her champion, the one person in Willow Grove who truly saw her for who she. Seeds of change. Ava smiled softly at Monica's words, but the heaviness in her heart lingered. They sat together on the patio, the cool night air wrapping around them like a protective blanket, the stars overhead blinking quietly in the vast sky. The wine helped loosen some of the tension in Ava's body, but her mind was still tangled in the events of the day, replaying them over and over. She didn't want to be seen as a hero. She didn't want to be seen as other. She just wanted to be seen. Monica, sensing Ava's inner turmoil, didn't push for more words. Instead, she sat beside her, offering quiet companionship, knowing that sometimes the best thing a friend could offer was presence, not answers. Ava appreciated this about Monica. Their friendship had always been easy, no need for pretenses or filling silences with meaningless chatter. They could simply be. After a long stretch of comfortable quiet, Ava spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. I've been thinking about Jasmine. Monica turned to her, her brow furrowed in concern. What about her? Ava took a deep breath, staring out at the dark silhouettes of the trees in her yard. She's going to grow up in this town, and she's going to face the same things I've faced, maybe worse, and I don't know how to protect her from that. I don't know how to prepare her. Monica was silent for a moment, letting Ava's words hang in the air. You can't shield her from everything, she said gently. But you can teach her. You can show her how to be strong, how to be proud of who she is. And most importantly, she'll have you. You'll be her example, Ava. She'll see how you carry yourself, how you handle these situations, and she'll learn from that. Ava nodded slowly, but the weight of responsibility pressed down on her chest. She wanted so much for Jasmine, wanted her to grow up confident, unafraid, and unapologetically herself. But Ava also knew the world didn't always reward those qualities, especially for girls like Jasmine. There would be times when the world would make her niece feel small, and no amount of love or guidance could entirely prevent that. I know, Ava said softly, but sometimes I wonder if this is the right place for her. For us. Monica's eyes widened slightly. You mean, leaving Willow Grove? Ava shrugged, the idea still half-formed in her mind. I don't know. Maybe. It's just, I've tried so hard to make this place home. But the truth is, I'm always going to feel like an outsider here. And Jasmine, she's still young. But eventually, she's going to feel it too. Monica nodded, understanding. I get it. This town, it's not exactly the most diverse place. And it's not just about race. There's this rigidity here, this resistance to change. People like things to stay the way they are. And anyone who doesn't fit into that perfect little picture gets pushed to the edges. Ava sighed. Exactly. And I don't want Jasmine growing up thinking that she has to bend or shrink herself to fit in. She deserves more than that. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation hanging between them. Ava sipped her wine slowly, her thoughts swirling like the dark liquid in her glass. Could she really leave Willow Grove? She had built a life here, her job, her home, her friends. But even as she thought about all the things that tied her to this place, a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that maybe she was clinging to something that wasn't meant for her. Monica broke the silence, her voice tentative. Do you remember when I first moved here? I didn't think I'd last 6 months. Ava smiled at the memory. Monica had arrived in Willow Grove about a year after Ava, a single mom with a young daughter, trying to start fresh after a messy divorce. She had been overwhelmed by the same tight-knit, insular culture that Ava had struggled with, and the two women had bonded over their shared sense of not quite fitting in. "You kept talking about moving back to the city," Ava recalled with a soft chuckle. "You hated how quiet it was here." Monica laughed, a short, knowing laugh. "Yeah, I did. But eventually, I realized that I wasn't going to find home here by waiting for the town to change. I had to build it myself. I had to find my people, my tribe, and make it work. And you were a huge part of that, Ava. I don't think I would have stayed if we hadn't become friends." Ava smiled, but Monica's words brought her back to the core of her dilemma. She didn't want to simply survive in Willow Grove, constantly pushing against the current. She wanted a place where she and Jasmine could thrive, where they could be part of something without having to fight for it. But did that place exist? And if so, where? "Do you think I'm running away if I leave?" Ava asked quietly. Monica shook her head. "No, I don't. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from something that's not serving you. This town, it's not going to change overnight, and you deserve to live in a place where you don't have to fight just to be seen." Ava nodded, her mind still turning over the possibilities. The idea of leaving felt both terrifying and liberating. She had worked so hard to build a life here, but maybe it was time to let go. Maybe Willow Grove wasn't meant to be the final chapter in her story. As the night deepened and the wine bottle emptied, the conversation shifted to lighter topics: work, funny stories about their students, plans for the upcoming weekend. But beneath the laughter, Ava's mind was still processing. Seeds of change had been planted in her heart, and she knew it was only a matter of time before they sprouted. The next morning, Ava woke early, her mind already buzzing with thoughts of what the future might hold. She made breakfast for Jasmine, who bounced into the kitchen with her usual morning energy, chattering about her plans for the day. Ava smiled, listening to her niece's excitement, but her mind kept drifting back to the conversation with Monica. After dropping Jasmine off at her friend's house for a playdate, Ava drove to the park. It was early enough that the park was mostly empty, just a few joggers making their way down the trails and a couple of parents with strollers. Ava found a quiet bench near the lake and sat down, staring out at the calm water. She needed to think, needed to figure out what her next steps would be. The idea of leaving Willow Grove was still so new, so uncertain. But the more she thought about it, the more it felt like the right thing to do. The problem was, leaving wouldn't be easy. It would mean uprooting her entire life, starting over in a new town, finding a new job, a new school for Jasmine. And as much as Ava longed for change, the thought of going through all that was daunting. But staying meant continuing to fight against the quiet hostility of a town that would never fully accept her. It meant Jasmine growing up in a place where she would always be seen as different, where she would have to learn to navigate the same prejudices that had shaped Ava's own life. Ava's phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from Lisa Harper. "Lisa, hi Ava. I've been thinking about our conversation a lot. I really want to do better. If you're open to it, I'd love to meet up for coffee and talk more. I know I have a lot to learn, and I'd really appreciate your perspective." Ava stared at the message for a long moment, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of her was touched by Lisa's sincerity, by her willingness to confront her own biases and try to make amends. But another part of Ava was tired. Tired of being the one who had to teach, tired of carrying the burden of other people's ignorance. She typed out a quick response. "Ava, thanks for reaching out, Lisa. I appreciate it, but I think I need some time to process everything right now. I'll let you know when I'm ready to talk." As she hit send, Ava felt a strange sense of closure. She didn't owe Lisa anything. Not her time, not her energy, not her forgiveness. Ava had spent too many years trying to fit into spaces that weren't made for her, and she was done doing that. It was time to focus on herself, on Jasmine, and on finding a place where they could truly belong. As she sat by the lake, watching the sunlight dance across the water, Ava felt a quiet sense of resolve settle over her. She didn't have all the answers yet. She didn't know where they would go or what their future would look like. But she knew one thing for certain: staying in Willow Grove wasn't the answer. Change was coming, and this time, Ava was ready to embrace it. A fork in the road. A week passed after that quiet morning by the lake, and Ava found herself standing at a crossroads, both literally and figuratively. The days had been filled with a strange mix of calm and uncertainty, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for her to make a decision. Each morning, she woke with a new resolve to start the process of leaving Willow Grove, only to falter as she moved through the motions of her life. Teaching her third-grade class, picking up Jasmine from school, running into familiar faces at the grocery store. But under the surface, there was an undeniable shift. Something inside her was changing. The incident at the pool had marked the beginning, but now it was evolving into something much larger. Ava was starting to see the town with new eyes, and with every encounter, every small, seemingly innocent moment, she became more aware of how deeply ingrained the invisible walls were that kept her feeling isolated. It wasn't just the sideways glances anymore. It was the way people spoke to her, the subtle tone shifts, the microaggressions she had normalized over the years. The day after she'd saved Emily, Ava had gone to the grocery store, and she could feel the whispers as she passed by the aisles. People didn't approach her directly, but their eyes lingered longer than usual, and conversations seemed to hush as she walked by. Even at the checkout line, the cashier, a young white girl named Katie, had awkwardly mumbled a thank you under her breath for what you did for that little girl. Ava had nodded politely, as she always did, but the entire interaction left a bitter taste in her mouth. She hadn't asked to be anyone's hero, especially not in the way people were framing it now. The looks, the whispers, they weren't just about admiration. There was something else in them, something that carried an undercurrent of disbelief. Disbelief that Ava, a black woman in a predominantly white town, could have been the one to save a child from their own community. And disbelief that someone who didn't quite belong here could have done something so profoundly impactful. She tried to shrug it off, reminding herself that what mattered most was Emily's safety. The child was recovering well, and that was the important thing. But deep down, Ava knew it wasn't just about the incident. It was about everything that had come before it. The years of feeling out of place, the constant need to prove herself worthy of existing in a space that never truly accepted her. One evening, as she was tucking Jasmine into bed, Ava felt a surge of protective love for her niece. Jasmine was still too young to fully understand the complexities of race, privilege, and exclusion, but Ava knew the time would come soon enough when Jasmine would begin to ask questions. She wasn't blind to the fact that Jasmine had already noticed the differences between herself and her classmates, between her family and those of her friends. "Auntie Ava," Jasmine said, her small voice breaking the quiet. She was clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, her eyes sleepy but thoughtful. "Yes, sweetheart. Why don't we ever see anyone who looks like us at school? Like you and me?" Ava's heart clenched at the innocent question. She had known it was coming, but it didn't make it any easier to answer. She sat down on the edge of Jasmine's bed, stroking the little girl's soft curls. "Well, sweetie," Ava began carefully, "there aren't many families in Willow Grove who look like ours. It's not something that's wrong or bad. It's just how things are in this town." Jasmine frowned. "But why? Don't other people like it here?" Ava smiled softly, wishing the answer were as simple as Jasmine's question. "It's not that they don't like it here, baby. It's just that some places are different. People come from all kinds of places, and sometimes those places aren't as welcoming as they should be. But that doesn't mean you're not special or that you don't belong. You belong anywhere you want to be, okay?" Jasmine seemed to consider this, her small face scrunching up in thought. "Okay," she said finally, but there was still a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "But Auntie Ava, if we go somewhere else, will there be more people who look like us?" Ava's breath caught in her throat. There it was, the question that had been gnawing at her for weeks now. Was it time to go somewhere else? Somewhere Jasmine wouldn't have to ask these kinds of questions. Somewhere she wouldn't feel like she was the only one who stood out in a sea of sameness. "I don't know, Jasmine," Ava answered honestly. "But I do know that no matter where we go, we'll always have each other. And that's what matters most." Jasmine smiled, seemingly satisfied with that answer, and snuggled deeper into her blankets. Ava leaned down to kiss her niece's forehead. But as she did, she felt a pang of guilt. Was she doing enough for Jasmine? Was she giving her niece the best possible future by staying here in Willow Grove? The next day, Ava made a decision. It was time to explore her options. If she was serious about leaving, she needed to start looking at what life outside of Willow Grove might look like. She didn't have a concrete plan yet, but she knew she couldn't just wait around, hoping things would magically get better. She started by reaching out to an old college friend, Carla, who had moved to a larger city a few hours away. Carla had always been one of those people who radiated energy and confidence, and she had built a successful career as a lawyer in a progressive, diverse community. They hadn't kept in close contact over the years, but Ava knew Carla would have some valuable advice. "Girl, I've been telling you for years to get out of that little town," Carla said with a laugh when Ava called her. "You know I love you, but Willow Grove is not the place for you." Ava chuckled, though it was tinged with nervousness. "Yeah, I know. I didn't want to run. I thought if I stayed, I could make a difference. But I'm starting to realize that maybe it's not me who needs to change. Maybe it's the town." Carla's tone softened. "Ava, there's nothing wrong with wanting to make a difference, but you can't pour from an empty cup. If you're constantly having to fight just to be seen, just to be accepted, then you're not going to have the energy to do what you're really meant to do. Maybe it's time to find a place where you don't have to fight so hard." Ava was quiet for a moment, letting Carla's words sink in. "You're right," she said finally. "I've been so focused on making things work here that I didn't even stop to think about how much it was costing me." "So what's the plan?" Carla asked, her voice light again. "You gonna move out here and join the city life? We could use a good teacher like you around here." Ava laughed, but the idea took root in her mind. "Maybe," she said. "I'm not sure yet, but I'm definitely thinking about it." They talked for a while longer, catching up on each other's lives and reminiscing about their college days. By the time Ava hung up, she felt lighter, as if the simple act of considering a new path had lifted a weight off her shoulders. Over the next few days, Ava began doing more research. She looked at schools in nearby cities, communities where diversity wasn't just a buzzword but a lived reality. She explored job openings, thinking about how she could transition into a new school district. It was overwhelming at times, the idea of uprooting her entire life. But it also filled her with a sense of possibility she hadn't felt in years. But even as she took these steps, there was still a part of her that hesitated. Willow Grove had been her home for so long, and the thought of leaving behind a life she had built was daunting. What if she was making the wrong choice? What if things didn't get better in a new town? What if she couldn't find a place where she and Jasmine truly felt they belonged? And then there was Monica, her best friend, her rock, the one person who had made life in Willow Grove bearable. Could she really leave Monica behind? Could she walk away from the community they had built together, even if it was a small one? One evening, after another long day of teaching, Ava sat on her porch with Monica, sipping tea and watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful. "I've been looking at other places," Ava said quietly, breaking the silence. Monica didn't look surprised. "I figured," she said. "You've been different lately. I could tell something was on your mind." Ava nodded. "I just don't know if I can do this anymore. It's not just about me. It's about Jasmine." She deserves to grow up somewhere where she doesn't have to question why she's different. Monica sighed, staring out at the horizon. I get it. I really do. And as much as I'll miss you if you leave, I think you're doing the right thing. Ava's heart clenched. I don't want to leave you behind, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Monica smiled sadly. You won't. We'll always be friends, no matter where. A new beginning. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of planning, reflection, and bittersweet goodbyes. Ava made her decision. She was leaving Willow Grove. It hadn't been easy to finally take the step, but after her conversation with Monica, Ava knew she couldn't ignore the deeper call in her heart for something more, for somewhere she and Jasmine could truly thrive without the constant weight of feeling like outsiders. As the end of the school year approached, Ava found herself navigating two parallel paths, one filled with nostalgia and reflection, the other with preparation for the unknown future. Every day brought a new challenge or moment of hesitation, but it also brought a strange sense of clarity. She was ready to let go of the past and step into whatever lay ahead. The farewell at Willow Grove Elementary. The end of the school year at Willow Grove Elementary was always an emotional time. The children buzzed with the excitement of summer approaching, and the teachers worked tirelessly to wrap up final grades and organize end-of-year celebrations. But for Ava, this year was especially poignant. It would be her last in the small, sunlit classroom where she had spent so many years teaching. Her students didn't know yet. Ava had decided to wait until the final week to break the news. She didn't want to overshadow the joy of their summer anticipation with the sadness of her departure. Still, as the days ticked by, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the impending goodbye. One afternoon, as she sat at her desk grading papers, Tommy, one of her brightest students, approached her desk with a wide grin. He had always been an inquisitive boy, and his creative stories had earned him a special place in Ava's heart. "Miss Thompson," he asked, his eyes full of that childlike eagerness she had always loved, "do you think we'll ever have a teacher as fun as you next year?" Ava felt a lump form in her throat. She smiled softly at Tommy, her heart aching. "I'm sure you will, Tommy. But just remember, no matter who your teacher is, it's your curiosity and creativity that make learning fun. Keep that with you, okay?" Tommy nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. But his innocent question lingered with Ava long after he had returned to his seat. As the final week approached, Ava stood at the front of the classroom, watching her students work on their end-of-year projects. Their small heads bent over colorful construction paper, scissors, and glue, filling the room with the joyful chaos of creativity. She had always loved this part of teaching, watching young minds come alive with possibility. But today was different. Today, she would tell them that she was leaving. When the time came, Ava gathered the children in a circle, her hands folded in her lap as she searched for the right words. She had rehearsed this moment a dozen times in her mind, but now that it was here, her heart was heavy with emotion. "Class," she began, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest, "I have something important to tell you." The room fell quiet, the children's eyes wide with curiosity. "This is going to be my last year teaching here at Willow Grove," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I'm moving to a new town after the summer, so I won't be your teacher next year." A collective gasp rippled through the group. Some of the children looked confused, others looked sad, and a few even looked on the verge of tears. Ava felt her heart break a little as she saw the realization dawn on their faces. "Why?" one of the girls, Emma, asked, her voice small. Ava smiled gently. "It's just time for me to start a new adventure in a new place. But I want you all to know how much I've loved being your teacher. You've all taught me so much, and I'll carry those memories with me wherever I go." For a moment, the classroom was silent, the weight of her words settling over them all. Then, one by one, the children began to speak up, offering their own goodbyes in the only way they knew how. "I'll miss you, Miss Thompson," said Tommy, his voice wobbling slightly. "Me too," echoed another student, and soon the room was filled with the sounds of their farewells. Ava fought back tears as she hugged each of them, one by one, their small arms wrapping around her waist. She had given so much to this school, to these children, and now she was leaving a part of herself behind with them. Packing up the pieces. The process of packing up her life was both exhausting and cathartic. Ava spent hours going through her small house, sorting through years' worth of memories. Old photos, books, letters, and mementos filled boxes, each item a reminder of the life she had built in Willow Grove. There were moments of doubt, moments when Ava wondered if she was making the right decision. What if she moved to a new place and things didn't get better? What if she was leaving behind the only sense of stability she and Jasmine had known? But every time those doubts crept in, Ava thought of Jasmine's question. Why don't we ever see anyone who looks like us at school? It was the quiet reminder she needed that staying in Willow Grove meant settling for less than she and Jasmine deserved. Ava also thought of Monica. Her best friend had been nothing but supportive, even though Ava knew it would be hard for both of them to adjust to the distance. They had been each other's lifeline in a town that often felt indifferent or even hostile. But Monica had encouraged Ava to spread her wings, knowing that their friendship would remain strong no matter where Ava went. The hardest part was telling Jasmine. Ava had rehearsed the conversation in her head 100 times, but when the moment came, it was just as difficult as she had imagined. One evening after dinner, Ava sat Jasmine down on the couch, her heart heavy with the weight of what she was about to say. "Jasmine, sweetheart, there's something we need to talk about," Ava began, her voice soft but steady. Jasmine looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. "What is it, Auntie Ava?" Ava took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "We're going to be moving, Jasmine, to a new town, a new school." Jasmine's face scrunched up in confusion. "Why? I like it here." "I know you do, sweetie, but I think it's time for us to find a place where we both feel more at home, somewhere where there are more people like us." Jasmine seemed to consider this, her little face serious. "Will I still have friends there?" Ava smiled, brushing a curl away from Jasmine's forehead. "Of course you will, and you'll make new friends too. It's going to be an adventure, and we'll do it together, okay?" Jasmine nodded slowly, her trust in her aunt unwavering. "Okay," she said softly, "as long as you're with me." Ava's heart swelled with love for her niece. Always, baby, always. The day of departure. The morning of the move was bright and clear, the air filled with the smell of summer. Ava stood in front of her house, watching as the movers loaded the last of the boxes into the truck. It felt surreal, knowing that in just a few hours, she would be driving away from Willow Grove for the last time. Monica came to see her off, tears brimming in her eyes, as she hugged Ava tightly. "I'm going to miss you so much," Monica whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll miss you too," Ava replied, her own eyes wet. "But this isn't goodbye. We'll visit each other, and we'll talk all the time." Monica nodded, wiping her tears. "You're doing the right thing, Ava. You're going to find a place where you and Jasmine can really thrive." Ava smiled, though her heart ached. "I hope so." As she and Jasmine climbed into the car, Ava took one last look at the house, the neighborhood, the town that had been her home for so many years. It was bittersweet, leaving behind the life she had built, but she knew it was the right decision. She had outgrown this place, and it was time to move on. The car's engine hummed to life, and Ava pulled out of the driveway, her heart filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of possibility, of freedom. As they drove away, Jasmine looked out the window, her voice soft but full of wonder. "Where are we going, Auntie Ava?" Ava smiled, her eyes on the open road ahead. "Somewhere new, sweetie. Somewhere where we belong." And with that, they left Willow Grove behind, ready to embrace the next chapter of their lives. A chapter filled with promise, possibility, and the hope of a better future.